What's up guys, I'm Justin Burkholz. Today's video is about my lunar cycle ceremonies. So we're going to talk about the phases of the moon and the ceremonies that my partner and I created to celebrate each of those phases and make full use of their energy. But before we get to the good stuff, if you're interested in mysticism, history of religion, spiritual practices, or science-based protocols for improving longevity, health, and wellness, and want to support my effort to bring this content in an accessible format to a wide audience for free here on YouTube, make sure to hit subscribe, consider supporting me on Patreon or with a one-time donation. Those links can be found below. Today, most people are disconnected from nature. We live in our cities, inside our walls, safe from the elements, but also disconnected from them. Safe from predators, but disconnected from other animal life. We build lofty towers reaching up towards the sky and send probes out into the depths of space, but we forget about the earth below our feet, the sun, which gives us life, and the moon, who guards over us and provides light in the darkness. But we've started to feel it. Humanity has been moving away from nature and the natural harmony for too long, and it's time to come back. People are returning to the old ways of celebrating the cycles of nature, the seasons, the lunar phases, the equinoxes. We've thought of ourselves as separate and above the rest of nature for too long, and it's brought us suffering and crisis. We need to put this silly notion behind us and remember who we truly are. We've been struggling to swim upstream when the flow wants to bring us to prosperity and grace. We just need to stop being so stubborn and arrogant and let it carry us. The spiritual practices that I develop and use are designed to help us reconnect with the elements, the entities, and cycles of nature. This may make you uncomfortable at first because most people aren't accustomed to experiencing the elements, to celebrating nature, or talking to the planets, the sun, and the moon as brothers and sisters. But St. Francis was. He preached to the birds and the forest animals. He spoke of brother wind and sister water, sister moon and brother sun. It's a beautiful way to live, but sometimes it seems out of reach in modern society. And that's why I create these rituals and ceremonies to re-enchant nature and reconnect with nature, to be more like St. Francis. The lunar ceremonies we've created celebrate the new moon, waxing moon, full moon, and waning moon in a cycle. That's about once per week for a lunar month. And each one is designed to make full use of the energy of that phase. Most people have no idea where the moon is in its cycle. They don't pay attention to it at all. But if you start doing these lunar ceremonies, you will. You'll know because you'll feel it intuitively. You'll be entrained to the lunar cycle, and you can use the ebb and flow of its energy for your own intentions. If you go to my website, you can find ritual guides for each of the lunar cycle ceremonies. There you will see that each ceremony is broken up into parts, and I list instructions for each part. Here I'm going to break down each of those parts to hopefully clear up any confusion about what they are and why they are included, starting with preparation. So when it comes to any ritual or ceremony, preparation is the key to success. No one wants to stop a ceremony and go search for some missing material or item that you need. It breaks the circle, kills the vibe, and can just derail the whole thing. So for any longer ritual or ceremony, it is important to prepare thoroughly. And there are several recommended steps before the main body of the work, but each and every part is important and should be done with reference. Even a seemingly small and insignificant act can be profound and transformational if it is done with sufficient presence and intention. So take it all seriously, but not too seriously, okay? This is serious play. So don't forget to be playful, to have some fun, to experiment, but stay present and focused and keep your intention in mind. The space where you perform your ceremonies and other spiritual practices is your temple and should be treated as such. It is important to do your work in a space that feels sacred, and most people recommend using the same space every time, if possible. Of course, it is always best to be practical and make do with what you have. In my case, I have a limited number of rooms in my home, and I don't have a room set aside solely for meditation or spiritual practices. However, I do always use the same space, and I have consecrated it repeatedly with my Rose Cross ritual, which works for us. If you're interested in that, check out my blog. I'll have a link in the description. It's a really great practice for consecrating a room. Really helps to create that sense of contact with the divine or sacred that we're going for. It's also important to clean your space immediately before the ceremony and gather any materials that you will need. In my guides, I will always provide a list of all materials needed, but if you start designing and performing your own rituals, which I highly recommend, it's really helpful to just write down a little list of materials needed in a notebook or something for reference. It'll save you a lot of time. Now, for example, the element associated with the new moon is water. So for that ceremony, you should decorate your temple with the intention of evoking the element of water and the associated energies. So that would be items that are blue or green in color, that have flowing motion to them, or reflective, something like that. Use whatever works for you. If you need inspiration for the elemental colors and symbols, refer to my post on the Circle of Praise practice. For that post, I've created images for each element that contain corresponding imagery, colors, and symbols based on their associated zodiacal signs, planetary signs, and cherubic symbols. So if you're not familiar with all of that, I highly recommend checking out that post and just reciting those prayers while contemplating the corresponding imagery. You want to leave all of your worries, concerns, shame, and guilt behind when entering the temple and the sacred space for ceremony. Because of this, it is usually recommended to take a ritual bath. This tradition goes back thousands of years. In fact, when I was in Israel, every ancient site we went to pretty much had a ritual bath outside of the synagogue or the temple or the place of worship. And it's a very symbolic act to bathe yourself before you go into a place where you're going to meet the sacred or the divine. And so this is a very important step, and I do skip it sometimes or don't do a full bath. Maybe sometimes I take a shower, maybe sometimes I just wash my hands, wash my face, or change my clothes or something like that. But it's really important to do this step of cleansing yourself and preparing yourself so that you come to the ceremony with the right mindset. You want to leave everything else behind and come focused, ready to meet the sacred. So I do highly recommend doing the baths for the first full cycle through the Lunar Cycle Ceremonies at the very least, and then maybe altering from there. And figure out, what works for you. Use incense, candles, bath oils, whatever you want to do, or you can just take a shower, something like that. And once you're done bathing, get out and dress yourself in something very intentional. You want something, once again, that's going to invoke feelings of reverence, of being ready and clean and pure. And so that can be whatever makes you feel that way. There's not a specific type of dress that you need to wear. Just make sure that it is intentional. Would be my only direction there. Alright, so now that we've prepared our temple, our space, and we've prepared ourselves for ceremony, we're ready to begin the actual main body of the ceremony. So that starts with the closing of the circle. Now, like I said, this marks the beginning of the main body of the ceremony. In most traditions, a circle is drawn in dirt or in sand or sometimes with chalk on the floor, or maybe it's marked with candles or holy names or something like that. And the intent is protective. It's meant to create a container for the ritual or ceremony, for contact with the sacred inside that container, and it's also meant to keep unwanted energies or spirits or something like that out. Now, my circle is different. So instead of keeping things out, protecting ourselves from something, mine is an integration circle. So it's a call to action, a call to join in the beautiful act of worship and praising God that all of nature is always ongoing around us, and we're just simply not a part of that process. So my circle reminds us to integrate all of the parts of ourselves and all of the parts of nature, all of the elements, and join them all together into one intention and one act of worship. So that is very different than other magical circles that you will see, and because of that, I created my own practice that I call the Circle of Praise. I referred to it earlier, and you can find that listed on my website with a whole guide and corresponding imagery and everything for how exactly that works. So once again, instead of a protection circle, this is an integration circle, a circle of praise. In my circle, I make use of a large portion of St. Francis of Assisi's Canticle of the Sun, in which his words remind us the elements, air, fire, water, and earth, as he knew them, and the entities of nature, such as the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the earth, all serve a purpose, which is to be part of a grand symphony of praise to God. He says, "Praised be you, my Lord, through all of the elements, through all of nature." It's a reminder to see the good in everything, even in things that may seem destructive or dangerous, like fire. It is a reminder to integrate all of the parts of ourselves and to harmonize them into a single purpose, praising God. So, my circle is very unique, and I recommend, once again, using it for your first full cycle through the ceremonies, at the very least, and then you can experiment from there, create your own, look up other circles if you want. Always recommend experimenting and testing things out to see what works for you. If you want to find examples of other circles, you can look in books on indigenous religious rituals or modern witchcraft or ceremonial magic, and they'll have all kinds of different examples of circles that you can use. For mine, once again, it is centered around St. Francis's Canticle of the Sun, and I've taken his words and layered them with my own interpretations, symbols, movements, and visualizations to create a unique spiritual practice that draws on influences from Western esotericism, but also stays true to my Christian roots and my personal style. So it's a magical circle, it's a centering exercise, an attunement practice, and an homage to one of my favorite mystics, St. Francis. Francis saw the universe and our beautiful planet, along with all of its plant and animal inhabitants, as a grand song of praise to God. The elements, the plants, the animals, the stars, the sun, the moon were his sisters and brothers. And through recitation and contemplation of his words, we can begin to see the world that way as well. When we see the world in that way, it's no longer a place of suffering or a trap or a prison, something to be endured. No, it becomes a place for learning, playing, loving, flourishing, and growing. Performing the circle of praise before the rest of the ceremony helps to center us and remind us of the mindset we should be aiming for. It marks the transition from everyday life to the reverent presence of the ceremony. An invocation is a prayer, an attunement to a specific way of being, and a call to a deity to join you and empower your work. For the new moon, I invoke an element, water, a natural entity, Sister Luna, and a part of the Holy Trinity, the Holy Spirit. Invoking the qualities and powers of each will aid you in your ceremony. The last step started building, harmonizing, and integrating energy for the work, and this step continues that process. My lunar ceremonies also involve ceremonial objects and materials and actions as part of the invocations. And this is because I firmly believe that prayer is more powerful when it involves more senses and is more embodied and actionable than just simply speaking or thinking words. I really want this to touch every layer of our being, all the way down to our core. And the whole purpose of prayer is to attune you to a specific way of being, which is why it's so important to get deep with your prayer and not just recite things in your mind. You have to let it touch you in your heart. So the building of energy, gestures, prayers all serve a singular purpose: to transform the individual. For example, for the new moon, the ceremonial implement of choice is the cup. It is recommended to only use your ceremonial cup for ritual purposes and nothing else. Also, please note to modify my invocations freely. I don't recommend invoking or praying to something you don't believe in or that doesn't resonate with you personally. Now, I know that a lot of this is going to be very controversial and challenging for a lot of people, especially Christians like myself, and especially this specific part. Divination has a bad reputation and certainly has been used as a tool by plenty of charlatans throughout the ages. But the method that I use is mindful, growth-oriented, and incredibly powerful. In fact, this is probably the single most important part of the entire ceremony. There are many forms of divination, but for these ceremonies, we use tarot cards. We use a different spread for each lunar phase, and the readings correspond with the energy of that phase. They are specifically designed to provide clarity on your goals and how to achieve them. The practice helps to see what may be holding us back and what we need to focus on to continue to grow. The benefit of using the tarot cards specifically for this practice is that it introduces an element of chaos. In other words, an opportunity for the divine to communicate with us. And that forces us to look at a topic or problem from a different perspective than we normally would. Each card represents a specific mode of consciousness, and when you do the practice, you ask yourself a question, then reveal a card, and examine the question through the mode of consciousness that that card represents. So, even though you may have asked yourself that same question 100 times before, this practice will bring new insight, because the tarot cards themselves force you to reframe it. If you do these ceremonies as a couple, like my partner and I do, then you get even more benefit from this part, because this gives you time set aside every week just to think about and talk about your goals and your growth together in an atmosphere of reverence. I cannot overstate how powerful and motivating this can be. This is rational manifestation magic. In fact, I actually recommend learning more about the science of insight and motivation to more fully understand all the ways that this does work. It's important to choose a tarot deck that works for you and your aesthetic. My favorite is called White Sage Tarot by Teresa Hutch, and it's full of minimalistic but cute animal imagery, natural imagery, and a little bit of Egyptian mythological imagery, all of which is really good for me and connects with me personally and my vibe, but that won't be the case for everyone. There are a ton of cool decks out there with all kinds of variety of styles, so definitely find one that connects with you and resonates with you. If you want a good place to start, there is a specific variety of tarot deck that's called the Rider-Waite deck, which is kind of considered the gold standard that most other decks are based on or aspire to be. So if you want really classical imagery, go with that one. If you want one that is more modern or speaks to your personal aesthetic, look around a little more and find one that works for you. This next part is going to be new to a lot of people, but this is basically the culmination of the entire ceremony. The circle and invocation build and harmonize energy. The divination channels and focuses that energy, and this step crystallizes it into physical form. The use of sigils is pretty much ubiquitous in modern ritual or magical practice for good reason. They're really effective. There are several methods to create sigils and even more ways to use them, and throughout the lunar cycle ceremonies, we will make use of quite a few of those. During every new moon, we'll create our sigil that we'll use throughout the cycle, and we'll carve it into a candle, and then each successive ceremony will also make use of that sigil you created in different ways. But I want to discuss real quickly with you how to create a sigil and what exactly that is, since I know a lot of people will not be familiar with that. So basically, a sigil is a symbol that you create with a specific intention. So there's a pretty simple 4-part process to creating a sigil. The first step, or the first part in the process, is to write down a word or phrase or a short sentence that represents your intention. For instance, this can just be a single word, maybe healing. Then on your paper, you have that word written out. Cross out any letters that repeat. That's step 2. Step 3, deconstruct those remaining letters into their basic shapes. You know, if it's a C, that's a curve, or a T is something like a cross, whatever. You have the basic shapes of the letters. And then in step 4 is you take those shapes that remain and you arrange them into a symbol. A lot of times it's circular, but it doesn't have to be. And that symbol, once you've got that down, that's your sigil. And you'll use that for the entire cycle. Well, all things must come to an end. So just as the closing of the circle marked the beginning of the ceremony, the opening of the circle marks the end. We built up a lot of energy during the ceremony, and much of it was used and crystallized into our candle and our sigil, etc. But there are always fragments that need integrating and releasing. And that's what this step is for. We repeat the same circle of praise from the beginning, but this time we'll be putting out the respective candles in each quadrant as we go. And that's it. That's the end of the ceremony. Those are all of the parts of my lunar cycle ceremonies. And the specifics do vary for each part with each ceremony, and sometimes I move things around a little bit depending on the flow of that specific ceremony or the energy for that phase of the moon. But those are the basic parts. All right, so throughout the whole cycle, you'll learn a variety of invocations, tarot spreads, sigil techniques, and more, but the basic format stays relatively the same. Make sure to go visit my website for the ritual guides or pick up a copy of my latest ebook, Luna, for in-depth instructions on the entire lunar cycle, as well as other lunar-based goodies. It is offered for free for unlimited time if you sign up for this year's free March Magic Challenge. Registration for that just opened. So if you want to get a copy of that book for free, it contains my evening lunar ritual, all for lunar cycle ceremonies, lunar-based meditations, facts, poems, and other musings, and a guide to implementing all of that into your life and forming those as habits. So right now that is available for free. All you have to do is sign up for my upcoming challenge. You'll have until the new moon on February 19th to get started before we start the ceremonies. If you want me to guide you through the whole cycle, you can join us and we'll be walking you through the entire lunar cycle ceremonies during the challenge this year. All right, so go check that out if you're interested. It is a rare opportunity to go through the whole cycle with myself and my partner and other seekers. I hope to see you there. All right, well, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please leave those in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. And once again, thank you so much for supporting me and my channel. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that little notification bell so you don't miss any of the other upcoming content. If you would like to support me on Patreon or with a one-time donation, those links can be found below. And a huge thank you to my patrons who have signed up. Your support is greatly appreciated. It's going to help so much with building this channel and creating higher quality content for everyone here. So thank you so much, and have a good week. See you again soon.